Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar on Return to Work. This is the second webinar in a series of 3 designed and developed by Armagh City, Banbridge and Craigavon Borough Council in partnership with the Business Partnership Alliance. With a historically strong local business ecosystem, Armagh City, Banbridge and Craigavon Borough Council aim to continue supporting their businesses not just as we reopen, but throughout the recovery period in a really inclusive manner. We hope that the sessions with you have been informative and helpful as you not only think about how your business will begin to open, but how you will also drive that recovery within your own business. I personally am delighted to see the shops reopening as we need our town centres and city centres to return to being those vibrant spaces and places where people want to spend time and of course their money. I've also been hugely impressed by the work that most business owners have carried out to make sure that their premises, offices, spaces and places are safe to reopen, safe for their employees, safe for their customers, and also safe for those other businesses that are their neighbours. So with more companies, offices and retail shops continuing to prepare for this return to work, this session is going to provide businesses and retailers with the opportunity to understand some of the very specific HR issues and challenges, as well as financial challenges. My name is Kitty Doran and I am delighted to host this series of webinars on behalf of ABC Borough Council. And I'm also delighted to welcome 3 experts on our panel today. I would like to introduce you to Gillian McDowell, Director at Happy Raspberry PR, Andrea McCann, Partner at McKee's Solicitors, and Angela Cregan, Partner at Harbison Mulholland. You're all very welcome. So before we get stuck in and started with the detail, I just want to share a message of welcome from the Lord Mayor of Armagh City, Banbridge and Craigavon Borough Council, Kevin Savage.
Good afternoon, everyone. As you continue to plan for your business to reopen as part of the return to a post-COVID-19 working environment, we recognise and understand that this can be a daunting thought. So Armagh City, Banbridge and Craigavon Borough Council is here to provide you with the support you need moving forward. With the new government guidance, we all need to continue to plan for this next stage of recovery. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar to help your business reopen after the recent challenges. Today's topic is returning to work, HR, legal and financial considerations in a new environment. With more companies continuing to prepare their return to work, this session will provide businesses and retailers with the opportunity to understand some of the HR, legal and financial challenges they may have to consider in a post-COVID world. I am delighted to welcome experts from different organisations to share their experience in putting the necessary processes and procedures in place to ensure a safe working environment. Please also remember, if you have any questions or need some advice, I would encourage you to get in touch with the ABC Business Support Team, with further information available via the Council website. A callback service is in operation should you need to speak to someone. And don't forget to keep your eye out for the final webinar in this series, which will be held on the 17th of June with a focus on innovation. I would now like to hand over to our host, Katie Doran, Partner at Lanyon Group, and I hope you all find this session useful and informative. Stay safe, everyone, and let us know if you would like any help and support. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. So look, the format today is that each of the speakers, each of the experts have a presentation, a number of slides that they're going to take us through, and we'll also be putting some of the questions that you've kindly emailed in to each of the speakers. But if you do have questions during the webinar, please use the question function and we'll try to get through as many questions as we can. So for our first speaker, Gillian. Gillian, you're very welcome. And I'm going to start with you. And I just want you maybe to take a minute or two before you share your presentation to talk to us a little bit about Happy Raspberry HR and also maybe what has lockdown been like for you and what have been some of the challenges that you've been dealing with?
Okay, thank you very much, Katie. Yes, my name is Gillian McDowell and I'm the Director of Happy Raspberry HR. We are based in Portadown and we are an outsourced HR consultancy company. Our clients would be mainly small to medium-sized businesses who maybe don't have an HR function or they have a limited function, and they use us as an outsourced solution to help them take the headache out of HR and allow them to focus on their business. The challenges for us is like every other company. My team have all been home working. The challenges have been understanding the furlough, because it's a new term it's not under UK law. So like yourselves, we were grappling with that at the beginning and learning about it and making sure that we're here to answer your questions and help the businesses get to where they need to be, and ensuring that they're legally compliant throughout the process, as well as looking after their employees and protecting their business.
Yeah, because I mean, the furlough scheme has been wonderful, and it has certainly helped give businesses some economic resilience, allowing them to keep their staff as they look to build back and hopefully build back better. But it's also been quite confusing. So there's been lots of different stages in the process. And as an employer, there's quite a lot of considerations to be looked at, especially as we move towards the new changes. And I know Andrea is going to take us through more of the legal implications of the furlough scheme. So look, Gillian, thank you very much for that introduction to yourself and Happy Raspberry HR. I imagine you're one of the kind of business community that has been super, super busy over the last few weeks and months. So look, if you want to start with your presentation, because there's some fantastic insights in your slides.
Okay, thank you, Katie. So this is really about transitioning the employees back into the workplace and managing the back into the workplace. And how do you do that as an employer? So what is the responsibility on you as the employer? And also what are the responsibilities on the employees? So we're going to be going through a range of slides here to hopefully take you through the process and what that should look like. And first of all, it's about making sure that if you're getting employees to gradually return to work, it's about making sure that you have your audit trail, because further down the line, you could get a visit and you have to produce this audit trail of when did they go on furlough, when did they return from furlough, and you have to have that audit trail in writing. So whether it's a letter or whether it's an email, it's really important that you follow that through. But first of all, if you discuss with the employee when you want them to return to work, because remember, each employee will have their own challenges, whether it's childcare, whether it's caring for a relative, etc. So it's important that you have that initial discussion with them and then follow up in writing with them the date that you have agreed for them to return to work, indeed physically in work, or the date that they'll start to work from home. Also confirm with them that when they return to work, whether that's at home or whether that's physically in work, their pay will be restored to their full contractual pay, so 100% of their pay if they hadn't already been getting that. And confirm with them any holidays that they booked and what leave they have left, because you remember, for some employees it could actually be a couple of months from when they've been in the workplace. So it's just about going through all of that again with them. Next slide. So what are the employer and employee obligations? You can see here on the screen there are a number of obligations on both sides. The employer, a lot of it's around communication, and that's regular communication, from communicating safety messages and updates to the employee to ensuring they understand what they have to do to comply, that there is adequate supply of cleaning products and sanitizing, PPE if that's required within your business. And where possible, all meetings should be held and may be held via video conference calls for a period of time until the restrictions are further lifted. But there are also obligations on the employee. They have to rigorously apply the safeguarding measures that you as a business have put in place. They've got the social distancing, sharing company vehicles, things like even bringing in their own cups so that you're not sharing cutlery, etc. Simple things like that. But it's about telling the employee that this is what you want them to do. But also, very importantly, if they display any of the COVID-19 symptoms, that they come to their line manager or you as a business owner as soon as possible and let you know that they are displaying these symptoms. And we will be talking about what action then that they should take and you should take as an employer.
And Gillian, just to mention at that point, a lot of companies that we're coming across are really reaching out to their employees to co-design what these obligations look like and what the new processes look like. Is that something you would encourage businesses to do, to really get their employees on board and help co-design what the new processes might look like? And
yeah, absolutely.
Gillian?
Absolutely. We are going to be talking shortly about a lead representative within your company. It doesn't matter whether your company is 5 people or 100 people, if you identify someone who you can liaise through, that's really helpful, because then the employees will know to go to that person and say, look, what about doing this, or how about doing that? And then they can feed that back to you as the business owner, because you're going to be busy trying to get the business up and running again. So sometimes if you put in mechanisms like that, it's a way of everyone feeling that there is that two-way communication process going on, and also that, you know, you're listening to what their concerns are and you're acting on those concerns, and that's really reassuring for the employee as well. Next slide. Okay, so we as an employer then have to address the risk. We cannot ignore this. COVID-19 isn't something we've had before, it's something completely new. But we have to address that risk, and we have a duty of care to do that under the health and safety legislation as well. So first of all, and we will be talking about this in a wee bit more detail later, is the completion of a risk assessment to identify any risks and put measures in place. We've just talked there about a lead representative, and that's really useful as a conduit for you, so that you don't have 10 different people coming to you all the time and you're trying to get the business back up and running. It's really, really important that you do COVID-19 induction training with every employee, along with a return to work meeting with them. And again, we're going to cover that in a wee bit more detail later. Ensuring we've already touched on appropriate signage, hand sanitizer, and maintaining a log to facilitate contact tracing. So things like if you have drivers coming in or contractors coming in, who are they? So that if someone does have that COVID-19 symptoms, that you can contact them and let them know. Sneeze screens fitted at counters if applicable. Next slide. Okay, so it is mandatory for all employers to complete and implement a COVID-19 risk assessment. This isn't something that's just nice to do. This is mandatory, that you have to do this under health and safety. And it's right through from the simplest thing of hand washing to the more serious issues of mental health issues. So what will the risk assessment encompass? It will be, what are the hazards? So identifying what the hazards are. Who might be harmed? For example, your employees, your contractors, your visitors. What controls are required? So what controls do you need to put in place? Any additional controls that you should consider? And then action by who and by when, and then to sign off when that's done. And as I've said already, you'll see here there is a template that you can download for free, which is government approved from the website that we have up on the slide here. So it might be useful if you don't already have a risk assessment done, that you might want to look at that link.
So I take it that's a really good document in terms of guidance, Gillian. And I think, you know, when we look through some of the things that you're flagging up that need to be considered, they are actually quite straightforward, they're practical, and they're also low cost.
They are very much so, and it actually gives you examples in that draft risk assessment of things that you should be considering and risks that you should be considering, and what controls you can put in place. And then obviously you can amend them to reflect your own particular business. Okay, next slide. So we talked there earlier about reinduction training. Well, why would we have to do that? Well, whenever your employees were working pre-COVID-19, they were working in a different environment than what they're going to be working in now with post-COVID-19. And you can see here that there are a range of issues that we need to consider. We need to think about, well, what happens if staff feel unwell? You know, do our employees know what our risk assessment is? What PPE should they be using? Do they know where to get it? When to use it? Right through to mental health assistance. And again, it's really important that if you do, you know, upon doing reinduction training, that you get the employee to sign off to say that they've had the training and what date they've had it. Again, that protects you as an employer to show that you have taken on board your duty of care to protect your employees by giving them that reinduction training about what should be happening in the workplace post-COVID-19.
And I take it, Gillian, that training can even be done in advance of them landing back into the workspace through Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whatever tech platform you can. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. We also do with with a number of employees where we have developed our own package that we adapt to that particular business, and we can do that for them if they wanted, if they felt that would be easier. Next slide. Okay, so what should you do? You have an employee who's developed symptoms. What should you do as an employer? Well, if you have an employee comes to you and is saying that they're displaying some of the COVID-19 symptoms, you need, as part of the risk assessment anyway, they should be told you need to inform your line manager or the business owner as soon as possible. What you should be telling them to do is to self-isolate for at least 7 days from when the symptoms started, if they live alone, or 14 days if they live with someone else. And they will receive statutory sick pay during this period of time. If the symptoms worsen, they can contact, and I know better, they can contact the NHS 111 online procedure, or alternatively, they can contact their GP, because their GP can actually refer them for a COVID-19 test. And that's important to know. So, depending on your symptoms and trying to get people back to work earlier, a recommendation may be, look, contact your GP, see if you can get the test, because once you have the test, if you don't have it, then you can get that employee back to work. But obviously, yeah.
Gillian, yes, just to stop you there. So if you've a member of your team, they've phoned in, they think they've got some of the symptoms, should the advice be, well, please contact your GP immediately, and present for a test as quickly as you can?
Yeah.
That will then allow the employer and the employee to agree that it is safe to return to work. It'll also allow the employer to make the right decisions around the rest of the office or the workspace that person has been in circulation over.
Absolutely, because the sooner you can get a negative result, hopefully that will be the outcome, then the sooner then everyone in that office is not worried about, have I got it, have I been contaminated? So absolutely, the sooner you can get in contact with your GP and ask them to refer you for a test, which when they do refer you happens very, very quickly, then that's better for the employee themselves and also for the employer. Okay, so next slide. So what we're going to look at is the law on mental health, and you're probably thinking, well, what's that got to do with post-COVID-19? Well, we don't yet know exactly the mental health impacts that the COVID-19 will have. There are many factors to consider during lockdown. There's been social isolation, there's been our self-isolation, social distancing. There's been people who have been anxious about their own health, about health of their family members, not been able to attend family funerals, for example. And there's also that concern about actually coming back to work, and that concern and that anxiousness around, what does this mean? Am I going to get sick? About getting the virus, and also about job security in the workplace. We've heard on the news about redundancy. So there's a lot of anxiety going on out there. So you as an employer have a duty of care under health and safety to protect the welfare of your employees, and this includes mental health and well-being. So if you have employees who are presenting stress and anxiety as a result of COVID-19, then you have a duty of care to work with that individual and look at risks and put in a risk assessment, maybe personally to them, to see how those risks can be mitigated. Remembering also that nothing has changed under the law. Mental health conditions still amount to disability under the Northern Ireland Discrimination Order. And so where an employee is disabled, the employer must make reasonable adjustments to support them in the workplace. And we are going to talk about that in more detail in the next slide as to what potentially that could look like. And obviously adjustments will vary because every employee is different, every case is different. Therefore, the adjustments made will have to be looked at on an individual basis. Next slide. So what should employers do? There's a range of measures that you can do with employees experiencing poor mental health as a result of COVID-19. They can be anything from bringing that employee back on a phased return. So for example, 2 days this week, 3 days the next week, 4 days the next week, on a gradual phase return to build up their confidence, to manage the adjustment that's relating to their stress. And also it can go right through to where there is actually severe mental health conditions. And when you experience that, then what should you do then? Often we would advise our clients then to refer that individual to an independent occupational health advisor, because you as an employer are not medically qualified to ascertain what should or shouldn't happen, but at least they can give you that information for you to make informed decisions.
Certainly, that is one area that is going to be really complex, because I think a lot of people will need transition back into work, even those who aren't experiencing any mental health issues. But I think the jump from working from home that everyone's got very used to having to go back into workspace is quite a big transition in itself. And therefore that sort of phased return to me looks like the most sensible approach. Mm-hmm. But I've also had a number of calls this week with employers who are saying, my employees want back into the office. The advice is work from home if you can work from home. But some of my employees want back into the office because they're living with somebody who is suffering from severe mental health, and their mental health is now being impacted. Mm-hmm. So I'm feeling pressure from my employees to open up my workspace again. So it's quite a difficult space for employers at the moment, Gillian.
It is very challenging for them, really, and it's all completely new to them. So they're trying to learn and understand what their responsibility is in having a safe environment for their employees to come back to, and managing that transition. And it is about it's about that regular communication is absolutely key with the employees, and, you know, talking to them and understanding what they want, as well as making sure that you can accommodate that when they come back into the workplace. And that's why the risk assessment that we've talked about earlier is key, because it's given the employer that reassurance that they have put in place what they're legally responsible to do, and making sure that they are providing a safe working environment for their employees to return to as well. Okay, so next slide. So the role of the manager and the business owner, it's about managing absence, and it's exactly what you would have done previously. So post COVID-19, these are things that you would have done, I have no doubt, in terms of returning to work, meetings, if they come back, okay, how are you feeling, what, you know, why we off sick, and just, is there anything you need to help, or whatever, depending on the nature of why they were off. Looking at phased returns, and it comes back to that regular communication. Under the furlough scheme, you can do rotational furlough, so you can have someone off and then bring them back, and then let someone go on furlough and bring someone else back. So again, it's around that communication to see what's going to work for the employees, but also what's going to work for your business, because you have got to get your business back up and running, and that's what's key here. Otherwise, you know, it could have a potential impact on redundancy. So it is about understanding what your business needs are, but working with your employees to make sure that those business needs are fulfilled. Applying your policy as normal. We've talked about the adjustments, and if required, occupational health. If you don't have one internally, then independently, there are occupational health providers out there. And on the right-hand side, you can see a range of opportunities that you can help people manage their mental health. And we talk about workloads, well-being conversations, encouraging well-being activity at work. Those are all areas that you can sort of help put in your toolbox in terms of, right, well, how can we manage that? Next slide. So I've put up on the screen here, there are a number of different websites for employers to get further information, and these are websites that we would use as well. So the first one is our professional body, and it has got a lot of information around mental health and in the workplace, and what you can do, and resources that you can use, and it's really, really good. We also have the health and safety, government.co.uk, and that's where I've signposted you to get the risk assessment. You've also got the gov.uk guidance, working safely from coronavirus, and these websites are really important, because they also give you, as well as what your risk assessment can be. If you are a retailer or you have a warehouse, they've broken them down into specific areas, and then that breaks it down even further into the specific areas of risk that you need to consider and put pros and controls in place for. So I thought that might be useful just to share with you. Next slide. So finally, just to say thank you for the opportunity of sharing with you what we do this afternoon. You can see here there are a number of different areas that we can provide support on, and as well as our contact details. So thank you very much.
Gillian, look, thank you for all the work and effort you put into that presentation. And we're going to hear from Andrea soon, much more on the kind of legal nuts and bolts of the furlough scheme. But lots of questions for you, Gillian, and we'll cover some of those at the end. One I wanted to ask you now, because I think it's on a lot of employers' mind, and it's around levels of productivity when the employees do come back into the workspace and place, and how, you know, I think there's a feeling, you know, will employees be able to deliver the same level of output that they were pre-COVID? And, you know, what kind of tools are there in the toolkit, the HR toolkit, to motivate the employees to increase productivity and feel happy that they're back to work?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a really good question, Katie. I think there is that nervousness, and whenever people aren't feeling that they're maybe engaged, I think that the engagement piece is really important, and the engagement piece comes with regular communication. and, you know, encouraging them and explaining that through even the risk assessment that they are coming back to a safe working environment, just that encouragement piece. And also to have those, even if it means like regular daily briefings just with their team initially to get everybody back on board, getting even that social interaction piece going and realising it's actually quite nice to be out of the house again and back to some kind of normality from a social perspective. And if you do all of that, if you do that, and it's about, dealing with anyone's concerns as well in a meaningful way, not just that you're paying lip service to it, then you will find that the productivity then will follow naturally.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of employers out there hoping that their employees are going to make their life much better when everyone's back into work and bring them the coffee and the buns in the first place. Not sure that's how it works. So look, Andrea, you are a partner in McKee Solicitors and you specialise in employment law. And thank you very much for joining us here today. I mean, Gillian has covered quite a lot of the HR aspects there, but you're going to take us through a presentation which really breaks down the changes in the furlough scheme that are coming in on the 1st of July, the 1st of August, and some considerations that employers may have as we move towards this change in the furlough scheme.
Yes, thank you, Katie. Yes, I have all the dry information compared to Gillian's. So where are we now with furlough? Treasury figures yesterday apparently show some 8.9 million workers are currently covered by furlough, which is massive. So moving forward, June is exactly the same as the scheme has been. So furloughed workers continue to receive their 80% of their current salary funded by the government, up to £2,500, and they must not work for the employer. So flexible furlough starts in July, but I would point out there's no obligation on an employer to use flexible furlough, and employees can be kept on full furlough until the 31st of October, subject to the new payments that the employer is going to be required to pay, and I will come on to that shortly. However, the intention of flexible furlough, and to use the government word, is to support the transition back to work. The employer still has the benefit of the furlough scheme, but may also benefit from employees being back on a part-time basis, especially with the recent easing of restrictions across many business sectors. And the part-time work can be at home or in the workplace. And it's also important to remember that throughout this period from July to October, the employee will still receive their 80% of normal salary. So for July, government will continue to pay 80% of the fully furloughed salaries, plus national insurance, plus pension contribution, and the employer will only have to pay for any hours that are worked. From August, government continues to pay 80% of the furloughed employee's salary up to the cap of £2,500, but employers will now have to pay national insurance and pension contributions regardless of whether the employees are working part-time or fully furloughed, and again, employers will pay for any work that is undertaken for August. In September, government will pay 70% of furloughed employees' salaries up to a cap of £2,187.50. Employers again will have to pay national insurance and pension contributions for all employees and 10% of the wages to make up the 80% total. And again, employers will be paying for any part-time work that's undertaken. And then come October, the government will be paying 60% of furloughed employee salaries up to a cap of £1,875 per month. Employers will still be paying the national insurance and pension contributions plus 20% of wages to make up 80% of the total, and also any part-time hours that may be worked for that month. I thought it was useful at the end of my slides, I have given you a worked example of how this will look like in practice about Charlotte, who is the only employee of a small travel agent. Pre-lockdown, Charlotte was working full-time. She has been furloughed since April, and her employer is bringing her back to work 2 days a week. And you will all be delighted to know that further guidance on flexible furloughing and how employers should calculate claims is due to be published this Friday. So keep an eye out for that. And my next two slides.
Can we just stop there a little minute? So that was a really good example about Charlotte. So let's just say Charlotte's coming back to work on the 1st of July, okay? And she's coming back 2 days a week. Does that mean that 2 days are paid out of the 80%, or those 2 days are paid out of 100% of her salary?
No, she will be paid 2 days out of her 100%, her normal pay.
And then the government will cover the other 3 days.
Yes. Claims going forward is for normal hours not worked. So that is still on the 80%. But if she comes back to work 2 days a week, that would be based on what her salary was pre-lockdown.
Okay, unless her employer has decided that she's going to be returning to an 80% contract. Okay.
But yes, unless that has already been agreed in advance, which may or may not have happened. Yeah.
Okay, I have another question for you about Charlotte. So what if Charlotte was due a significant pay rise that had been agreed and it's due on the 1st of July? Will the payments from both her employer for the 2 days and on the furlough scheme on the 3 days, will those reflect the new salary that she was due to go on the 1st of July, or will those be reflective of the salary paid over the previous 12 months since the 31st of March 2020?
No, if she's due a salary rise in the 1st of July, that won't have been reflected previously, but would be going forward if that is a contractual entitlement pay rise.
And so that will also be reflected in the furlough payments?
Yes, it would be, and that's similar to the increases in the national minimum wage that came in April as well. That impacted on the salary claim for those because they come in April.
Okay, great to put you on the spot, Andrea.
You're all right.
I know you have the answers, and these are things that are in employers' heads. So thank you. That's really useful. Go ahead. Next slide.
So the next two slides. Okay, so these tables are good reference points for you, and they're actually taken from the government fact sheet on flexible furlough. And I have set out a link on my useful link slide for you to access those. So that's those next two. So next slide. Yeah. Okay, so then on to the next slide. Okay, so working life during furlough. So what are the key takeaways and issues about flexible furlough? Okay, so employers need to remember the current guidance of working from home where possible, but if not, then providing a safe and healthy workplace and all the matters that have been outlined by Gillian. The scheme closes to new entrants on the 30th of June. So everybody knows that today, 10th of June, is the cut-off date for an employer to furlough an employee for the first time. Flexible furlough can include employees who have previously been furloughed, even if they have been taken off and are actually working on the 30th of June, for example, on a staff rotation. There must be agreement to the new part-time working arrangements and confirmed in writing. So if you are planning to bring an employee back, say for 1 day per week, then this has to be agreed with the employee and also in writing. So the furlough claim now will be based on normal hours not worked in any claim period, with employers then having to report hours that have been worked that they will be paying for. And claim periods need to be a minimum of 1 week after the 1st of July. The maximum number of employees an employer can claim for in any claim period cannot exceed the maximum they have claimed for under any previous claim under the current scheme. So what that means is that if the maximum number of employees you have ever claimed for in a claim is 20 employees, you will not be able to claim for any more than 20 from July onwards. So given the extension and changes to the scheme, you should check your existing furlough letters and agreements and see if they contained a specific end date, and if you're planning to keep an employee on furlough until the end of the scheme, you should put this in writing to them. If you have work for some of your employees, how will you do this? How do you decide who to bring back? Or it might be the case that with social distancing protocols, you can only bring, a certain number of staff back. So, I mean, an employer will primarily be guided by business needs on who to recall, and they could even ask for volunteers. An employer will have to consider personal circumstances of employees, but most importantly, an employer can't use discriminatory criteria on who to recall. So this leads on to looking at those employees who either can't return to work currently or won't return to work. So if we look firstly at those who can't return during this time, Gillian touched on this, the most obvious one being employees who might have childcare difficulties. As things currently stand, this is going to be a major issue for employers and employees. There's no ability for grandparents to help out. There's no creches, childcare facilities are closed, schools are closed. If possible, then can that employee work from home? Or if not, you will have to keep them on furlough until the end of October. However, if this extends past the 31st of October and this employee still can't come back to work, you're looking at them taking annual leave, unpaid parental leave, or time off for dependents. But I think childcare it's going to be an evolving issue given all the recent attention it's getting. This would be similar for employees who are shielding, even with the limited opening up of restrictions this week. For them, again, look and see if the shielding employee can work from home, but if that's not possible, they too might be kept on furlough. If an employer has concerns whether an employee is actually shielding or not, it would be reasonable for the employer to ask for medical evidence. And secondly, what about those who simply won't return to work? It is important for the employer to establish the reason why someone is refusing to return to work. They may have genuine concerns about health and safety in the workplace, and that is a legitimate reason for refusal to return. However, there might be some who are having too good a time on furlough and simply saying no. So this could be a refusal to follow what's called a lawful and reasonable instruction, and a refusal would be a breach of the employment contract, and it would entitle the employer to invoke disciplinary proceedings. Linked with today's date are maternity returners. This clients. So if you have employees coming towards the end of their maternity pay period or their maternity leave period, after today, you will not be able to put them on the furlough scheme. It's a difficult one for employers because they don't want to put pressure on an employee to return early. And as you know, an employee has to give 8 weeks notice of an early return from maternity, but that can be waived by the employer. So if they're not furloughed today, then they're just going to return to work as normal. Annual leave has certainly been a hot topic. Leave continues to accrue during furlough. It can be taken during furlough, and an employer can ask employees to take holidays during furlough by giving double notice of the amount of holiday to be taken. Holiday pay is full pay, so you would need to top up the furlough payment to 100%. And this can include bank holidays that fall during furlough if they're included in someone's annual entitlement. I will come on to discussing redundancy in a bit more detail, but for present purposes, it is possible to make someone redundant whilst on furlough, and they can work out their notice whilst on furlough. But notice pay would be full pay. So you can use your furlough money, but that will have to be topped up to normal salary, but you can't use furlough money for the actual redundancy payment. So next slide. Okay, so what happens after 31st of October? I mean, what is work life going to be like post furlough? So are there any positives? For many businesses, furlough has saved employers from making redundancies. Without a doubt, there will be opportunities to promote and maintain remote working, looking at flexible working practices, cutting down on the requirement possibly for office space, thereby saving rent and rates, more use of virtual and remote meetings, meaning increased efficiency. And certainly some of our clients have told us that their staff have been more productive working at home. Negatives, some businesses might decide they no longer need premises. So this would involve surrendering leases with landlords with cost implications for the surrender premium. So when it comes to your workforce, how can you save costs? Or, you know, if you decide you don't need all of your staff. So you could consider things like natural wastage, recruitment freezes, stopping or reducing overtime, offering early retirement to volunteers, retraining or redeployment, career breaks or sabbaticals, or secondments or pay freezes. I expect the main options to be considered by employers will be agreeing reduced working hours with some or all of their staff. For example, if you have an employee who had been working 35 hours a week pre-lockdown, but is now only needed for 20 hours a week, or keeping the 35-hour working week, but with a percentage reduction in salary. So these changes would have to be by agreement with your employee. And employment contracts, like any contract, it has to be, you know, any variation should be agreed. And if you do get agreement, this should be evidenced by a modification to the employment contract. And annual leave would also reduce pro rata with any reduction in hours worked. If an employer can't get agreement, the alternative could be redundancy, or it's called dismissal re-engagement. That is, it's the employment contract and reissues a new contract on new terms to the employee. So just moving on to redundancy. So an employer considering...
Sorry, Andrea, just before we go on to the redundancy piece, because there's actually a number of questions in that space, but there's also a few others that have come through around. I mean, your last two slides just have so much in there, and I think I know. Really start to highlight how challenging the landscape is for employers and for employees. But for example, the annual leave. So for a company that doesn't allow their staff traditionally to carry over annual leave, are there options to make changes? I mean, you know, somebody may have their teams coming back to the workplace September, October time. They're going to have all of this annual leave to take. You know, what are the kind of parameters around that? Because I don't think any employer who traditionally didn't allow carryover of annual leave is suddenly going to want people carrying over 10, 15, 20 days. So that's just one example, one question that's come through, Andrea.
So the working time regulations have been amended by the government to take account of the fact that it might not be what they're calling reasonably practicable for employees to take their annual leave in a leave year. So there's an ability now for a 2-year carryover of annual leave. It's really aimed at maybe those where businesses are getting back up and running, and you know they can't afford for their staff to be off on leave, so they will be able to carry over for 2 years.
And is the employer allowed to limit the number of days the person can carry over? So can you say, look, we don't traditionally allow you to carry over days, but under our new, you know,
it will be, because it's under the working time regulation, so it will be the statutory annual leave amount. So it might be that somebody has more than that in their actual contract. So the carryover will be the statutory amount of the 5.6 weeks. The 20
and employers won't be able to reduce that. So if somebody gets a statutory leave of 20 days. I mean, no employer...
But they can agree that. I mean, you know, the employer and the employee can agree.
Okay.
You know, what it'll be. Listen, we'll let you, you know, carry 10 days over or whatever. But I know a lot of our clients, they have asked staff to take a certain percentage of their leave, say by the end of August this year, and you know, they haven't encountered, you know, any difficulties. Employees are, you know, they're happy to work.
Well, it comes back to this kind of new world of higher levels of engagement between employers and employees.
Yeah.
And you know what? I think that's healthy. We have another question, which is probably going to lead into your next slide. I have 70 staff, but I can only bring back 35 due to the social distancing requirements. What are my options with new furlough arrangements?
Yeah, so that was, I had touched on that previously. So so where physically in your premises, you can only take, you know, 35 back. So that will be a decision then for the employer, you know, what 35, you know, to bring back, taking into account those factors, you know, of those who maybe can't currently come back to work.
And the other 35, they will have to remain on furlough?
They would remain on furlough until the scheme runs out, and then post 31st October, if it's still the case that there's not the work for the 70, then, you know, looking at these cost saving measures, whether that is, you know, pay reductions, reduction in hours, or redundancy.
Yes, and I mean, look, I think this person's question is around the social distancing, and everything is so fleet of foot at the moment that I imagine the 2 metre rule will very soon be reduced to a 1 metre rule, and that may allow that employer to bring back
more back, yeah. Yes.
So look, Andrew, let's get back to your slides as we're moving into the redundancy section.
Yes, yeah, so just really an employer considering redundancy has to remember that the legal framework and the usual rules around redundancy still apply. So what this means is that firstly, there has to be what's called a genuine redundancy situation. And secondly, there has to be a fair redundancy process followed. And that's in terms of consultation, your selection, and considering suitable alternative employment. Consultation will be individual consultation if there are less than 20 employees at risk of redundancy. So individual consultation meetings would discuss things like, you know, is there any way to avoid redundancy, giving an opportunity to the employee to object to the selection criteria. Are there any suitable alternative vacancies, and what the potential redundancy package would look like. The timeline for individual consultation is what would be reasonable in the circumstances. Collective consultation comes into play if there are more than 20 employees at risk of redundancy within a 90-day period. Consultation would be with a trade union or existing employee reps, and there would be a 30-day deadline for commencing a consultation. When it comes to selection criteria, it's important that the employer uses fair, objective and reasonable criteria when they are picking their selection pool and then their scoring matrix. If someone is selected for redundancy solely on the basis that they have been on furlough, that would be an unfair redundancy process, you know, and dismissal. So it's advisable to have a range of criteria in your scoring matrix. If you just use last in, first out, that isn't advisable because that's potentially age discrimination. Criteria will vary depending on your type of business, but some examples would be perhaps objective performance appraisal scores, attendance, provided that isn't due to a protected characteristic, for example, being off or being ill for, you know, pregnancy-related illness, timekeeping, disciplinary, and transferability of skills. Payments on a redundancy include the statutory redundancy payment, and you know, there are links to working out what the statutory redundancy payment would be. Notice pay, which, as I've said, is full pay, and any accrued holiday pay. And again, I've set out a link to the LRA redundancy guide in my useful links slide. There has been some discussion whether there will be any repercussions for employers who have claimed furlough money throughout the whole scheme and then dismiss employees for redundancy on the 1st of November. HMRC has been clear that it will investigate any suspected abuses of the scheme, and the government guidance itself warns employers against making fraudulent claims. However, I don't expect HMRC to take any action against employers who have made genuine mistakes with their claims.
And look, yes, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, no, it was just, I read something interesting yesterday that HMRC has encouraged anyone who suspects an employer of committing fraud to report it through its dedicated online portal. And as of the middle of May, they had received 795 such reports, which I assume will be investigated.
Okay.
So
I'm really conscious of time because
I know I'm finished.
That's good. So much to cover with you, and there's been so many questions. Just in terms of the questions, there's a lot more questions that come through. We won't have time for them today because I want to give Angela the next.
I'm happy to deal with.
So Andrea, what we'll do is we'll send through all the questions to yourself and then you can get the answers right back into the Business Partnership Alliance, and they can get them out to everyone who joined us today. So Angela, over to you, because finance really underpins getting these businesses back up and open and heading towards recovery. So as I said, we're short on time today for some reason. There's just too much to talk about. So we're going to give you 10 minutes. We might just run over the 3 o'clock by a couple of minutes. So far ahead, Angela.
No problem at all, Katie. Thank you, and thank you for the introduction. And I think probably it's worth saying at this point that I, in terms of business, have taken a lot from what Gillian and Andrea have already said. So it's been very useful. I've been taking notes, so hopefully everybody has been doing the same thing. As Katie said, I'm a partner in Harbins from Holland. We are very supportive of the small and medium enterprises within Northern Ireland. As such, we've set up a family business forum about 5 years ago just to give a platform for businesses to share information, and not necessarily all clients of ourselves, but just locally owner-managed businesses in Northern Ireland. And we've also set up a support group with McKees and Claire Henderson recently, really due to COVID-19. And if I link on the slides, just there's some good advice on there, and as things are unfolding, it's constantly updated. So if anybody wants to refer to that, please do. Next slide. So in terms of key financial information, the points I want to discuss, just turnover, gross profit margin, fixed costs, and cash flow. Next slide, please. So in terms of turnover and the businesses obviously that are on, you need to be considering who are my customers, who are my current customers, and how do I continue to sell to them with the restrictions in place. No doubt the landscape has changed for all businesses, but there are still customers there, and how do we best serve those? And what are my competitors doing? You don't want to be in a situation where maybe the business down the street has better social distancing, is making their customers feel a bit safer possibly than you are. So you want to make sure that they're not drifting to other places. And there are businesses actually that have been doing quite well during the pandemic. I know certainly here locally, our local butchers, our local farm shop, all of those local businesses are doing extremely well, probably better than before. So how do they retain those businesses, or those customers, sorry? Next slide. So one of the key considerations for your business is your gross profit margin, which is just effectively your revenue less what it costs to buy that piece, and what you're selling it for in the percentage. So it's key more than ever now to know your product lines, which areas of your business are more profitable, and to make sure that they are the bits that you're focusing on going forward. In terms even say of a manufacturer, you want to make sure it's the most profitable things that you're continuing to put your focus on. And in terms of supply chain, it's inevitable that there's going to be difficulties in supply chain going forward. So now is the time to start to look for alternatives. It's quite likely with supply chain slowing down that prices will go up. And it's a good idea at this point to start to inform your customers there might be price increases coming down the line, and that applies to services as well as goods. I think people are much more receptive if they know that it's coming rather than just being slapped on at some point. Next slide. So So fixed costs, I mean, this is key to any business. You need to know what your fixed costs are, how much of those costs that you can be, that are going to be there, regardless of whether you sell nothing or you sell a lot. Typically, there'd be your rent, your rates, your insurance. Wages and salaries are a bit flexible, but there's still a certain amount that you're going to have to cover. So how much do you need to sell to cover those costs? And is it actually possible to sell that amount in this current climate? It's all very well knowing what your costs are and how you cover those, but can you physically do that? Maybe possibly because of the social distancing or just demand. So it's key to look at that at this stage. And if the answer is no, that you can't sell enough to cover your costs at this stage, how long will this continue to go for? And do you have enough cash reserves to support you until such a time as you're at that stage? Next slide. So cash flow is key to all of this, and certainly even ourselves as our business. As soon as this was starting to unfold, we started to look at our cash flow because we knew undoubtedly that possibly even with accountancy services that we're not the top of the list whenever people want to be paying their bills. So who is and how do you manage that? So it's a good idea to look and say what is in my bank account now and prepare a cash flow. I think in the short term for 3 months, just look and say, right, how do I get over this short period? Extend it to 9 and 12 months and if possible beyond. It is difficult at the minute because everybody, the environment's so uncertain for everybody, but certainly in the short term it's something that can be looked at. And it is just as simple as how much cash is going to be coming in and how much cash is going to be going out. I think the term cash flow tends to frighten people slightly, but it's as simple as that, what's coming in and what's going out. If
people are, when they start looking at their cash flow, and I would suggest they look 3, 6, 9 months and really get in under the hood of their management accounts as well. But as they're looking at that, and if they're really concerned that they're going to be running out of cash at certain points, or they're going to need more flexibility around major payment times in the month, what do you suggest they do? Should they be talking to their banks now? And also, how many of the loan schemes are still available for some companies? So, for example, the bounce back loans that were out in the marketplace up to 50,000, can companies still apply for those loans?
They can indeed, Katie, yes. And I would say you can approach your bank now. If you're looking at your cash flow and you see a point that you're going to need an overdraft or a loan, or certainly that the money is going to run out, this is the time to go and have the conversation with your relationship manager. And yes, the bounce back loans are still available, as are the C-bills loans. Yeah. The bounce back tend to be up to 50,000, and I suppose the appeal of those are there's no repayments for the first year, there's no interest in the first year. And certainly things might be okay at the minute for a lot of businesses, but you need to look at the point if you've deferred your VAT, if you've deferred your PAYE, what are things going to be like come next January or come next March? So you might want to have that 50,000, apply for it, have it put in the bank, and then you can use it at that time. If it's not used, you can certainly repay it. There's no penalty for early repayment. So I think if you think at all that you're going to need it, you'd be best just to go ahead and get it now.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the great loans, especially for businesses in the SME sector.
Absolutely, and it's a fairly straightforward process. I think there's about 8, it's not owners, about 8 questions, 8 to 10 questions, so it's fairly easy to apply for. Okay, next slide. So what help is available? It leads well from your point there. If we go to the next slide, there's just on my slides, whenever they're circulated, there are links to all of the things that are available at the minute. The job retention scheme we've already touched on. I don't propose to go through that again. I suppose just again, being aware when you're doing your cash flow and you're considering managing the business going forward, just that extra cost, because you're going to be paying for your employer's NIC, you're going to be paying for your employee's pension. There might be a different consideration as to who you're bringing back and when, and just to build that into your cash flow projections. The C-bills, the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, which has been, I suppose, given the title of C-bills, are still available. They're loans for small to medium enterprises up to 5 million. In the first 12 months of interest is being covered by the government. It's repayable up to 6 years. So again, if you feel that the business might need more than the 50,000 bounce back, there's no guarantees required up to 250,000. Beyond 250,000, it's sort of up to the lender. They may ask for some personal guarantees, but they shouldn't be asking for property or personal private residence. There may be other guarantees just they require. The bounce back loan, we've again already touched on, between 2 and 50,000, available for 6 years and no repayments in the first 12 months. And next slide. There's also the Self-Employment Income Support Scheme, which is a taxable grant of 80% of the trading profits for 3 months up to, so you can claim for that up to the 13th of July. HMRC should have contacted anybody that's eligible to get that at this point, but if you feel, certainly anybody here feels that they should have got it and they haven't, there'd be no harm in going and researching that and contacting HMRC directly, because they don't always get it right, as we know. Statutory sick pay, there's a potential to reclaim for 2 weeks of sick pay for any of your employees that are absent from work. And again, definitely go ahead and avail of that, and there's a link there in relation to it. VAT, you can defer any VAT liabilities that were due between the 20th of March and the 30th of June. That's really anything that was due to be paid in that period. Now that will now, if you take avail of that deferral, it will be due for payment 31 March 2021. So just be aware it will be coming down the line, and build that into your considerations. And if you pay your VAT by direct debit, cancel that direct debit, because they may go ahead and take it because they know it's due. Repayments should still come in, and you should still submit your VAT return. Don't just think, oh, because I'm not paying it, I don't submit it. Get the VAT return submitted. Income tax, you can defer your self-employment payments that are due in July to January, which again is a deferral. It does give you a wee bit of cash flow, gives you a wee bit of headroom, but just be aware that it's coming down the line, and that might be again where the bounce back or the C-bills might be helpful whenever those liabilities are starting to crystallise. Okay, next slide. Income tax deduction. The business rates holiday was put in place really, and it was automatically applied, and it was it's actually very helpful for hospitality, because they're getting it right out to the 31st of March 2021, which hopefully will give a wee bit of ease for them. Cash grants between 10 and 25,000, they were available. Most of the people who were eligible for those will probably have claimed for them by now, but it's worth noting anybody, the smaller, the micro businesses that weren't able to avail of those, can actually possibly apply for a hardship fund, and the closing date for that is actually this Friday. So anybody on that thinks that possibly they may be able to apply for that should go ahead and do that sooner rather than later. And you can just go in and do an eligibility checker, and once you do that, you have to actually do that to apply, and at least it'll give you an idea of whether you should be able to receive that or not. Time to pay arrangements, you should be able to excuse me, contact HMRC and put some sort of arrangement in place if you're having difficulty paying those liabilities as they become due. But it is worth noting, if you're furloughing your staff and you're doing the reclaim there, you'll not be able to defer the PAYE and NIC payments on salaries where you're receiving the government furlough scheme. It's just a no-no. The way they say it, you're receiving the money, you should pay the liability on those. Okay. And then there's the Coronavirus Future Fund, which are convertible loans between 125,000 and 5 million, which are really for those companies that are innovating and unfortunate enough are supposed to be in that position. But they should also have already had 250,000 of equity investment into the company in the last 5 years to be able to avail of that. Okay, next slide. So just, I suppose, considerations in relation to your cash flow, which I've already was mentioned with Kitty. Access the finance now if you can. Go ahead and speak to your relationship manager. When you're preparing your long-term cash flows, make sure you're putting in the repayments of any of the finance that you have got. You've got it now, but ultimately it will have to be repaid at some time. Make sure included in. Have a look and see what level of turnover you're going to require to cover these new outgoings. And is it possible? You look at your past trading history. It's all very well saying, oh, well, if I make that, that'll cover my repayments. But have you been able to reach that level of turnover before? And again, just credit control, keep a tight rein on that. You know, it's all very well us sending invoices out the door, but it's not actually a sale until it's actually paid for. So just try and keep those in mind. Okay, next slide. And in relation to staff costs, I know Andrea has covered it very well. And it's just that the point of having a look in terms from the finance side of things to see, you know, what's most cost effective to bring back in again, manage the staff that you're bringing in, make sure it's the staff that you need for the business needs. It's all very well saying you might bring somebody in because they're slightly cheaper cost, but are they going to be able to add to your turnover and ultimately your profit? So try and have a look at that while staying within all the legal guidelines, obviously. And there will be certain staff members who you know will be shielding, and you just try to manage all of that and look at those restructuring plans now. You know, try and look look forward. I suppose everybody knows maybe a certain element of that coming. And the more we can address it now, the better. And have a look at those. If we think there's going to be redundancies coming, what is likely to be the cost of those, just in terms of the restructuring. So that's me, Katie. It's a bit of a whistle-top stop but if there's any other questions, we do have the guidance that I've already referred to. Our website address is there and my own email address. If anybody has any other questions that we haven't picked up now, please don't hesitate to get in touch.
Look, thank you very much, Angela, and I'm sorry to rush you.
You're okay.
Towards 10 to 3, and we are a couple of minutes over, so I am going to wrap up quite quickly. There are quite a lot of questions that have come through, and they'll all be sent to you, and we'll get back to everyone that has asked questions. I mean, I think, you know, on the HR and employment law side, there's just so much to cover, and I think today's content has been extremely helpful. Once again, Angela, I think the message on the financial side is very like the HR and employment law side. You need to communicate, whether that's with your bank or, and we know the banks are in a much better place these days and should be really putting the arm around their customers, but whether that's communicating with your bank or communicating with HMRC. So if you don't think you're going to be able to make some of those payments, or you do need to take a payment relief holiday, get on the phone, have those conversations early with HMRC. So look, as I said, thank you everyone for all the preparation and the content and the information shared today with those that have jumped on this webinar. As always, I find it fascinating as well as overwhelming, because there's just so much to think about as everybody. Locking down was a whole lot easier than reopening, but I think the important thing is that everyone stays safe and takes care of each other. So thank you very much, and thanks to everyone who joined us today. Take care and stay safe.